Sweet. Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming. Just gonna give it a few and see who else is joining. Jen always plays elevator music, so I might play some elevator music. I feel like it works well. Oh, gotta admit. Oh, this is definitely exactly what she plays. Can everyone hear this? No? Yeah? Might be loud, I don't know. Technology. Hello, everybody. We'll give a couple more minutes and then we'll hop into it. While people are joining, if you, every live backcountry beta that you attend, you're entered into a True Gear gift card and Coalition Snow gift card. So we'll pick 2 winners from that. So if everyone wants to put your name first and last, please, in the chat. That way, if you're the winner, we can find you. So that would be great. Where is the chat? There's the chat. Yeah. So if you want to be entered into it, go ahead and put your first and last name in the chat. And thanks for coming. This is our 3rd backcountry beta session that we do in partnership with True Gear. And it is a free, sorry, people are joining and I have to approve them and multitask. This is a free event that we do. It is not instead of formal avalanche education, but it is sort of a nice way to get introduced into it or brush up on skills. Cool. So I'm going to pause the elevator music, and I don't really see a lot of people joining anymore. Just a few people here. Cool. All right, so I am Evan. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Coalition Clubhouse headmistress. And more people. Sweet, we have a lot of people joining. This is cool. Yeah, so I'm Evan, Coalition Clubhouse headmistress, and super excited to have 2 of our Coalition Snow ambassadors, Madi and Clancy, here to talk about some terrain choice and risk management. So we have a lot to cover, and I'm really excited about what Madi and Clancy have to share. And so if you do have questions as we go, you can definitely put them in the chat and I will try to get to those, but there will be a pretty good question time and sort of like interactive at the end. And if there's overlapping questions, I'll sort of try to get those together. And so to get started, I'll just have both of you, Madi and Clancy, go ahead and introduce yourselves and then we'll go from there.
I can start. My name is Clancy. I started working in the ski industry about 4 years ago, and I've had a couple of roles instructing and ski patrolling. And this year I started tail guiding, so took a couple more certifications this fall. And yeah, I live in northern BC in the Terrace area on the traditional territory of the Tsimshian Nation.
Cool. And I'm Madi, and my computer has a lot of age to it, so my video might be kind of in and out for this, but I'll do my best. Yep, see, there it goes again. But I'm a ski patroller in Big Sky, Montana. I'm based out of Bozeman. yeah, I've been on patrol for 6 years now, and I'm trying to kind of go down more of the snow safety route. So maybe one day becoming an avalanche technician, and we dig pits in bounds, look at the snowpack, decide whether or not to open or close things, and how weather and snow are going to affect the resort snowpack. And up until now, I've just had my level 1 avalanche education before it went kind of pro and rec. And then I got my pro 1 4 seasons ago to kind of beef up my ski patrol resume. So yeah, get into the backcountry a fair amount and also lots of stuff at the resort.
Awesome. Great intros. And thank you again for everyone being here. If you just joined, go ahead and put your first and last name in the chat. That way we can get you entered into a Coalition Snow and True Gear gift card. And now we're going to get into some talking about some backcountry etiquette. And we'll go on from there. But I'll leave it to you, Madi and Clancy.
Cool. Clancy, do you want to start kind of with the first talking points and then I'll follow up?
Yeah, sure. So when I think of backcountry etiquette, I think of a lot of the same principles that go along with any kind of use of an outdoor recreational space, like a park, even a city park. It's just kind of they say leave no trace there's like a through the national parks in the States, it's like the guiding principles for when you're out there, for making sure you're having a small impact. And then in practice, I mean, aside from things like really obvious things like packing out whatever you pack in, being really careful about where you use the bathroom, beyond that, goes into things like being mindful about where you're laying in a skin track, and specifically, another thing when I think of backcountry etiquette is, does everyone kind of understand what I mean by leave no trace? We'll put in the resources, we'll put like a link that actually has the principles so that you can take a look. But so leave no trace, and then group management as well. So that kind of goes for like being responsible for your own group and your group members and their actions, as well as like awareness of other groups around you. Being aware of the slopes that you're skiing on, and having some distance, being safe with not dropping in on another group, for instance, or making sure they're well away from kind of the run out zone of whatever you're skiing before you drop in. And also, like, if you're facing kind of a time constraint, like if a face needs to be skied before it's in the sun and you see another group heading up towards that line, it's like, they were here first, like they probably just give them a chance to get in there, that kind of thing. Does that make sense?
Do you mean like if there's a time constraint and you, I guess also that kind of gets into specific, like looking at the avalanche, danger and things like that, but that sort of rule of thumb, if there's a larger group ahead of you, go ahead and let them complete their tour first. Is that sort of what you mean?
Yeah, if another group has already started working toward a line, and if you're getting a later start than them, or if you can see that they're ahead of you, obviously, kind of polite to just let them, have it. If say, I guess I'm thinking like spring skiing, and if you need to get something before, like it's really in the sun and really affected by the temperature and the solar radiation, that was kind of what I was thinking.
Gotcha. Cool. And I feel like this is kind of a big thing, but like dogs on tours and stuff. I think one of you two is going to also speak to that, but I feel like that's kind of one that I don't even necessarily know that etiquette.
Yeah, so maybe moving into the dog side of things, you know, as far as like leave no trace is concerned with dogs, especially, like you always want to clean up their poop and stuff and not leave trail bags or like poop bags on the side of trails, which I think is sometimes kind of a basic thing, but also not something that everybody thinks about all the time when they're in the backcountry. Another thing, like me personally, I don't take my dog skiing with me a lot just because she's not great around skis. And she kind of does like a herding type of deal. And so even if, you know, she's focused on me and she's going after my skis, then maybe someone skis by and then she starts chasing them. And it's like, you have to have some kind of control over your dog. And I know it's not necessarily appropriate to take a leash everywhere, but just making sure, you know, they come when called and they're not chasing other skiers, or to that extent, if you are going to take them into avalanche terrain, just thinking about if you're at the top of an avalanche path or about to drop into your line, is the dog going to kick off a wind slab or cornice, that kind of stuff? Like, what is the dog above, or what could the dog be above if there were groups below? It's just kind of how I think about having dogs in the backcountry. So.
And some areas will have like dogs must be leashed or no dogs rules. So worth checking into your local backcountry area too before bringing your pal.
Yeah. And then I think too, like a lot of stuff that can easily be avoided just comes from, you know, communication in the backcountry. So like, say you do catch up to a group and you are moving faster, like it's totally appropriate to just say, hey, you know, what are you skiing today? Or, oh, we're approaching the same line. Trying to figure out if you're going to do that together. If one group's going to pass the other, go ahead. And then, yeah, just kind of to what Clancy was saying, trying to figure out managing two groups on one face or in one couloir. So, yeah.
So what is sort of the go-to etiquette for that? If, I guess, say you started fairly similar times and, you know, there's people above you and your group is still skinning up, would they go ahead and go, or would they wait for your group to get to the top?
Good question. I mean, I feel like it's kind of situational. If you're like fairly evenly paced, I feel like it would be sort of awkward to try to pass a group. Like, I feel like you end up, when you're in the backcountry in a like pretty populous area, you end up doing a lot of like shuffling, and like one group you'll pass each other, and then like you'll see the same group and you'll pass them when they're having a snack or something like that. But yeah, and that kind of leads into something else that I guess is kind of more goes into risk management a little bit, but I think it's just worth like touching on quickly, like the implications that group size can have on your kind of exposure. Because when you have a larger group, I think communication and decision making become quite a bit more challenging, and communication, as well as like even just managing a group on a line. Like, I have an example of this. Recently I was skiing in Rogers Pass, and I was in one party of 4, and we were kind of leapfrogging and, you know, shuffling with another group of 3. And we were going for the same line, and we ended up kind of connecting right as we were kind of reaching the cruxy move to get boot pack onto the ridge to access a couloir. And I think in that instance, there wasn't enough communication about what, like, the implications of kind of joining forces and skiing the line together, because just managing a bigger group in that kind of terrain is just like, you know, it's like, you can imagine one person gets to a safe zone and then the next person has to ski, and just in that scenario, it didn't work out great. And that doesn't mean it wouldn't always to ski with a bigger group, but I would just say that that's a consideration to make for sure. And maybe like maybe I'll put it to the group, like, do you think you all have like an optimal group size, or do you have like this is my cutoff, like I won't ski with more than 6 people or whatever?
Yeah, that's a good question for folks, if you have a optimal group size. But I do feel like that's a good segue into risk management and mitigation or risk assessment. If anyone wants to put, if you have any thoughts on that in the chat, otherwise, 4, 11. Yeah, I feel like 2, 4, 4, 6. Yeah. Yeah, so sort of, I feel like folks are lower number is a little more comfortable for communication is what's popping up. But yeah, what else do you two have for risk assessment and mitigation? How do you kind of what are the things you think about when planning to go out and thinking about those things?
Yeah, so I feel like with that kind of stuff, it's like you're only going to get into as much trouble as you kind of set your sights to. So you just really need to have a definitive objective for the day and say it's going to be a certain shoot out somewhere, right? For example. And it's like, okay, so do you have a plan B in case you get out there and you dig a pit and you're finding unstable results? If you start seeing obvious signs of avalanches, like maybe the chute right next to it slid and it looks very fresh. Just knowing when to either turn around or pivot to maybe a lower angle slope before you even get to your destination. And with that, it's kind of an important part to know your partner well and know their limits, and have a mutual understanding of when to back off or when to pursue something, and kind of just be in agreement with each other.
Yeah, I really like what you said about having a plan A, B, C, D, whatever, as many as you want. And I think sometimes it can be really helpful, especially around like December when like daylight is such a scarce resource, to just set like a check-in time for myself to be like, you know, especially if you're going a little further afield, and like if you have a definite point of no return where you're like, okay, if we make this move, like, you know, we're going to have to commit, that can be a really good time just before then to be like yes or no, as well as just taking into account your daylight, how much time it's going to take you to get back, just like, I don't know, a timer in your phone or mental clock, whatever.
I like that. So I feel like also depending with group size and things like that, sometimes I've noticed that the larger the group I'm in, that's when it can get a little more, people get really excited about something and it gets kind of hard to say like, I want to turn around, you know, like I wish I was always the person who said like, this makes me uncomfortable, but I definitely have an easier time doing that with a smaller group or with, you know, a partner who you really trust. But I like the idea of just like, you know, you stick to your plans and of, hey, if we're not at this point by this time. So I like that.
And then too, as far as mitigating risk, this is kind of jumping ahead slightly, but terrain management is a big way to manage your risk too. So if you're not going to ski the biggest line out there, then you're not going to have the biggest risk because it's not as complex of terrain. And so I think it's a good reminder that you don't always have to go out into the backcountry and ski the gnarliest line. Like you can just meadow skip and have a great time and keep it below 30 degrees. And then you don't really have risk besides maybe hitting a stump or your leg going underneath a log and like breaking a limb, but at least you don't have the avalanche hazard if you're keeping it mellow. And I think that's hard for us sometimes when it's snowed a lot, or the instability is obviously there from your local avalanche report. And you still want to get out there and do something, because I think in this day and age, we get pressure from society to always be doing something. So if you were to stay inside on a high risk day, people might, or, with our own ego, that might get in the way, but it's like, well, you can still go in super low angle terrain and not be underneath anything that has hazard. So.
Yeah, and that's a good, whenever you two are ready to move on, but to that sort of is like, what is avalanche terrain? Because we've kind of spoke on that a little bit, just to get specific. And then like how you were saying that, you can keep it under a certain amount of like steepness. You can just be going out to sort of walk around and maybe ski down or something. But what are the ways that we can sort of mitigate that by doing terrain choices? I liked how you said that, Madi, is like mitigating your risk by choosing certain terrain.
Right. Yeah. And that being said, it's like, you're not always going to choose the most simple terrain, because it's not necessarily fun to do that all the time, but just an option. So.
Yeah, I think, this is a little bit outside of risk management and terrain management, and more just in the interest of like your own progression and in the backcountry. I think it's a really valuable exercise at the end of the day, maybe with your group over a beer, or with your partner, or just by yourself, whatever, to just ask yourself, like, where did I feel the most at risk today? And were there any missed opportunities? Because, when you're traveling in avalanche terrain, you get so much like negative feedback oftentimes, where it's like, the only time you really get results and know you were wrong is if there was an avalanche, and that's not a great scenario. But it's also like in the interest of being more in tune with the snow and how it works. It's like, also, you don't necessarily like, you want to know when you're when maybe you could have gone and to a slope and not triggered an avalanche. So yeah, that's just one exercise I like to do. And then a lot of operations as well, during their end of day debrief, will ask those questions. And yeah, when like Madi said, like terrain choice is a huge part of risk mitigation. And some of my mentors in the Canadian Avalanche Association we have the phrase, like, when conditions are the question, terrain is the answer. And so even sometimes if you are looking at a slope that's quite complex or challenging, maybe just start to, like, in your head, choose the most like conservative line up, play a game with yourself where it's like, how could I, manage that terrain? Is there a way to do it to actually get from point A to point B safely? And actually we have a kind of a exercise with photos to start practicing that a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like, especially with that, just I very much am always erring on the side of like, everything's going to slide all the time, which isn't necessarily a great way to view everything, but also in a way it's like, well, hopefully never going to get caught in anything. But I think it is really helpful to be able to see photos of something and like be able to sort of visualize or say like, oh, this is where I was thinking, but maybe here are the problem areas. Like, I'm definitely a visual learner with that, because like keeping a slope not super steep definitely decreases your chances of it sliding, but there's also like where you might be riding and what's above you. So I feel like visuals definitely will help.
Yeah, there's never any issue with being the most conservative voice in the industry as well. Like the tendency these days to default to the most conservative voice. So I think that's worth putting out there as well. But that's okay. Maddie, are you feeling ready to move into terrain management?
Yes, I think it's time. So yes, since we're kind of getting to that point, the most basic way to think about terrain is just categorizing it into simple, challenging, and complex terrain. And so simple is kind of thought as like if you take it to a ski resort, right? Because a lot of us, if you think about it in the backcountry, it's like, oh yeah, well, you've got like meadows, then you have like treed gullies, you have chutes and couloirs and cliffs. But if you bring that into a ski resort and start thinking about it that way, I think it's a little bit more manageable in your brain. So simple slopes are things that are less steep, kind of like your basic green run in your head. Think about it that way. It's perceived more as simple or easy terrain, and there's a lot less hazard because maybe there aren't as many trees. The slope angle is below 25 degrees, that kind of stuff. And then when you move into the challenging terrain, that kind of gets you right into, maybe it's not always 35 degrees and above. And sorry, I'm looking also at this book. It's called Staying Alive in Avalanche Terrain by Bruce Tremper. I'm sure a lot of you have probably heard of it, but he has some great tables in here. And we'll also link it into the resources tab. So after this chat, you can always look back at those references. There's also the avalanche terrain exposure scale. So yeah, so with that, the challenging, sorry, my video is going. Challenging slopes would be seen as also mostly low angle and isolated slopes that are going to be below 35 degrees. It's more mixed trees and open terrain. And you could also potentially have overhead avalanche hazard or terrain. And then you've got your complex terrain, which would be more variable slope angles and larger or greater than 35 degrees. So more steep. You start thinking about that as like black terrain or double black terrain at a ski resort, whereas challenging would be more like blues, maybe kind of that mixed blue black. Yeah, and then along with complex terrain, you're also going to get more depressions, gullies, cliffs, maybe hidden slopes above gullies, cornices, all of that good stuff.
Yeah, totally. When we're talking about the avalanche terrain exposure scale, or the 8 scale, I think it's really a useful tool to start thinking about that one and using those eyes, like thinking about that criterion when you're out looking around, even just looking across the valley and trying to identify what features might be on another face. And so, like you're looking for the presence of a few things. You're looking for avalanche paths, like when you start moving from simple into challenging terrain, like there might be a few avalanche paths that you can generally you can manage them, like you can travel through areas that are safe. And then what's below you, what kind of terrain traps may exist, or maybe aren't any terrain traps that you're going to get pushed into in simple terrain, because generally you're pretty well outside of slopes that are going to slide. But when you move into challenging and complex terrain, you're going to find, yeah, like cliffs, gullies, yeah, trees could be a terrain trap as well. Should we, sorry.
You mentioned the rule of 8. For those of us who don't know what that is, can you briefly explain that?
The rule of 8?
Oh, I was muted. Yeah.
I don't know the rule of 8, but I was talking about the 8 scale, ATES.
That's what I mean. That.
Okay, yeah, so the avalanche terrain exposure scale, which you'll be able to find in the resources. And that started in, I think the 90s, and then was solidified in the 90s as a tool to evaluate avalanche terrain after some fatalities in a particularly difficult year snowpack wise. And it's basically just a way of evaluating. So when we talk about avalanche risk, avalanche hazard, or like the danger rating that your local bulletin is going to put out, is completely independent of like your risk. So you have avalanche hazard that just exists out there all the time. There's avalanche hazard, on Mount Waddington or whatever right now, but it doesn't turn into a risk until you introduce the human element, until you introduce something that is going to be in the way of an avalanche and so avalanche risk is a function of your vulnerability and exposure, if that, and hazard. So it's like hazard plus human equals risk.
Cool, that was good clarification.
Okay, so I think with all of that, maybe Clancy, if you want to start the screen sharing, and we can kind of start looking at photos of terrain, and then going into, maybe we could do a couple where we show like simple, complex, or challenging and complex, so that people can get a photo in their minds, and then we can kind of go into some of the, just picking out features and defining things.
Totally. Let me share my screen. Oh, are we hosts right now? I'm not sure if.
I think now you should be good.
Okay.
Is that working for you?
Yes, got it. Okay. All right. Can everyone see that? Good. So I'm just going to go straight over to the AITS explanation on the Avalanche Canada website. It's a great resource, whether you're in Canada or the States. So they have this explanation of the AITS scale, and then they show some photos for a demonstration. So when you look at this photo, what do you guys see? Can you like pick out any features, any of the things we talked about, like slope angle, elevation, stuff like that?
We got a mostly open face.
Yeah, so you can kind of see, well within tree line or below tree line, and it is quite low angle. And then there are also, it's like you have little slopes with kind of convoluted. There's no like planar face here or like convex roll to kind of walk over. Here we go. Let's go over here. So again, more of an alpine elevation, but really low angle. So they're calling this simple. Yeah, and then here we go, kind of tree skiing, storm skiing. So then we move into challenging terrain. Yeah, you can see these here look like they might be trim lines for some avalanche paths. So, you have a start zone, and then you'll have the avalanche track where you have the open face, and then the run out zone. So timber age and location is a pretty good way to judge an avalanche path. So you can see here that there are trees, and then very abruptly no trees in a avalanche path, very defined. But there you can see that you can manage this terrain. You could skin up in the trees, you can get onto the ridge. And then, here we go, same kind of deal. Can you see here how the trees look like they're pretty different ages? Like here you have some older, more mature timber. And then right here in this like pretty obvious path, looks like there's been an event kind of in the more recent past. And there we go. A ridge here, no big terrain traps. So.
But I think, and too, Clancy, when you, if you could go to that shaded bit of that slope, that's kind of in the middle, and there's that rock band over to the right. So like, I think one thing to note here is that challenging terrain definitely means it is avalanche terrain. I feel like sometimes when you think of a scale, you can kind of get fooled into thinking, oh, this is like relatively safe. But if you do look at that shaded bit where then you can see the rock band on the steeper bit of the slope, those shallow points are places where you can trigger an avalanche more. It's more likely to trigger an avalanche because the snowpack is maybe not as deep. So you're hitting those weaker or shallower spots in the snowpack. So if you do have the option of, if you are in challenging terrain, looking at those small features and just maybe seeing ways to avoid them, or, you know, if you're going to risk it for the biscuit and like hit a cliff or something, just know that that's somewhere that maybe you become the trigger.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess that being the big distinction between challenging and complex terrain, is that in challenging terrain, you will have features that you have to manage, features that, you know, steeper slopes, convex rolls, convoluted terrain, but yeah, it's not the whole slope that you're looking at isn't that way. All right, and then exciting pictures. So yeah, does this kind of make sense when we say, when you see multiple overlapping paths? Does that kind of, like this big slope, you know, gonna have a big bowl, and then looks like it's heading down into a gully. Again, yeah, super obvious, multiple avalanche paths. You can see some younger timber on the side there, so you can kind of see like, oh, look, a 100-year event, maybe a 25-year event. Yeah. Cool. So then, do we want to try some of the route finding exercises? Oh yeah, we still have some time.
Yeah, that sounds great. I think. Does anyone in the any participants have any specific questions about sort of that like simple, challenging, complex? If you do, you can go ahead and put it in the chat. Otherwise, yeah, I think that sort of that like route finding is awesome, because when I see some of those pictures, I'm like, well, I think that's maybe where I would go. I don't know.
Can I have a question?
Yeah, totally.
So I guess I'm just curious about scale, in like the landscape scale, as part of this. So it seemed like, you know, starting with simple terrain, you were looking at like 1 or 2 hill slopes, and then continually zooming up to complexes like the whole mountain. And I guess like I generally think about like the slopes I'm going to be interacting with, but I don't think about maybe the whole mountain necessarily. And I guess, is that like, I guess, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think like, I think especially when you're like thinking about objectives, I actually really like what you said, because you're talking about like breaking it down into features. If you can like break it down into like segments of skiable terrain and like evaluate that more on a like case by case basis. Like here, I just want to open this picture for an example. Like, yeah, this is a peak, but this is like one feature, if that makes sense. Like, I don't know, that's kind of a tough one because it's kind of complex, but
You sort of mean like there's other skiable features on that, but because there's a lot more going on, there's sort of a lot more to assess, maybe?
yeah, and you can have a mountain and you can have simple terrain below the tree line, because say like the issue that you were having was wind loading in the alpine and at tree line, but below tree line, you know, you have the slope is broken up by trees. It can be skied safely when the question is conditions, and maybe you have a bit of an unstable storm, snow or something like that. Does that make sense? Maddie, did you have anything to add to that question?
No, I think, yeah, you did a good job. But yeah, there's like the difference of if you're below tree line and there's just some meadows that you're skiing, it's like, okay, so there's no hazard above you. But then like you're saying, it's like if you're going for that bigger objective, that's a bigger peak, you'll have meadows to get there, but those meadows aren't the objective. And if the bigger peak's your objective, then that's where you start to break it up and think about your route or the terrain above you. Like you wouldn't necessarily on a high hazard day be skiing in a meadow that could be hit by something from above, I guess. And if you are, you should think about what's above you.
Yeah, and I think just always thinking about where you're traveling in terms of exposure above and below you. Like if a natural or there's a skier up there and a skier triggered were to go, like what are the implications for me? And then when you're skiing, same idea. What are the consequences below you?
And I think I'm just going to add a quick example of that. So I live in Bozeman, and one of the close ski areas is Bridger Bowl. And there's a big peak called Saddle Peak right outside the resort boundary. And it's really easy to access from our farthest south lift. So people go out there and ski it all the time. They post the avalanche bulletin. Most people come home fine and it's great. But the whole path, or one of the paths, ends in these huge cliffs. And then the ski area boundary ends. And once you're down into low angle terrain, people will go out there all the time and build jumps, but you're in a run out zone of a huge avalanche path. And you know, in the springtime, that's usually when that's happening. But just last week, I was riding up that chairlift and an avalanche broke, and it was all in the fog, so nobody really saw it coming. And then all of the debris came barreling down the cliffs, and it partially buried one person who had their skis off as they were building a jump. And the rest of the people, I think there were 11 in the meadow, were able to ski away. But it's just a prime example of they were not in avalanche terrain, but they were directly below avalanche terrain. So yeah, just think about what's above you and the consequences of what could happen if something was triggered above you.
Seems like it can't be hammered in enough about thinking about what's consequences above you and then what you could also be pushed into or people below you. It seems like that is a never-ending thinking about that. Clancy, are you pulling up some route finding?
Yes.
stuff?
Here's I think a nice one to start with. So maybe you guys can, or we can all just like take a quick 20 seconds or 15 seconds or whatever. Oh, we've seen this picture already. Perfect. So I want to say like you want to travel up this slope And then you want to pick the most conservative line down. So I'll say you are at A, just kind of the lowest point here. And then B, I'm going to go to red. So yeah, just think about how would you travel up? And then if you were to pick the most conservative line to ski here, where would you go?
And let's put it, if you all want to share in the chat, sort of, I know it's a little hard to describe in the chat, but that way everyone's not talking on top of each other, but sort of where you would, you know, to your best of your ability, describe how you would travel up and down in the chat there. We can see what people say.
Okay. Nice. So, yeah, there's kind of a consensus that the left side, this is kind of the shoulder, and it looks from this picture quite low angle. So I definitely agree. If you're choosing the most conservative line, you know, my red is gone. Oh, that's okay. You can see kind of up and then maybe even along this ridge, or some people are saying they would take kind of this little patch of trees up, and then this kind of benches out here, maybe travel this way. I agree with that. And then on the way down, I mean, like, yeah, there's nothing to say ever, like if you're taking the path of least exposure on the way up, and you do a test pit and something spooks you, or you see a natural across the valley, there's really nothing ever to say you can't just like ski the shoulder back down and take your skin track back down. So if we were trying to be conservative here, that would definitely be a good option. And yeah, then basically you're avoiding everything that makes this challenging. Cool. Does anyone have any questions about that picture?
What is there another route you see down, say the conditions were really good, other than hugging that tree line? Is there sort of another option you could draw on there for us if conditions were like
center punch it? I mean, a very safe conservative line down. I feel like if you were gonna ski this slope, like, I don't know, fall line's always nice depending on your comfort level as a skier. You know, maybe you still want to avoid this steep pitch, or maybe you don't, but yeah, I mean, anywhere like, so like, yeah, maybe another thing, you know, there's this kind of like right side trees, and then you're kind of above a bench here, and that's a pretty safe area too. Maybe that could be an area to like watch your partner ski, or like dig a test pit. But yeah, I mean, this here like, it's so hard to tell from pictures, but like this looks pretty low angle. You could ski down kind of along this like little rib here, and then take the left of the trees down to point A.
Oh, that's very helpful. Do you have one more terrain selection photo that you wanted to share? As I told you, you were muted. I was also muted, so there's that.
Thank you. Yeah, I kind of wanted to do, well, let's get my little A and B's out of there because I'm not going there. Oh, can you guys still see my screen?
No, but that's okay. We're all hanging out.
So I kind of wanted to do this one as well, because just it's a little more complex, a little more to think about. So let's say you want to put in a skin track up to the shoulder here, up to here, and you're starting kind of over here. And then at one point you also want to stop and do a little test pit. What are your thoughts on managing this? Zoom in a bit.
I might just chill at the bottom. I don't know about that one. I want those meadows.
Bring back the meta skipping.
Lisa says, stay on top of that ridge line. That would seem like it makes a lot of sense. Yeah, Nia, for sure. You and I can film. Right. And also I feel like this is a good lesson of like knowing what's outside of our comfort zones and being like, yeah, that's not within my like objectives, you know? And then some people could be totally stoked on that, which is cool.
Yeah,
like,
totally. So,
at a resort, more into that, but yeah.
Yeah, the ridge line. Totally. I think that like anytime you're like, because when you're here, you know, you're like you're pretty safe. And this looks pretty low angle. And then looks like you can just keep following it up. And then yeah, I guess this is kind of a sub peak. It's pretty hard to tell from this photo, but yeah. And then, well, as we're getting over there, you kind of have to go down before you can go up. So maybe my point B should be closer to there because it's pretty hard to tell, but yeah.
A little more manageable. You know, so where you put that little plus sign, can you explain why that would be a more safe spot to be?
Yeah. Do people know what I'm talking about when I say like a rib? Like if you're looking at a slope and you see like a rib feature, does a rib feature kind of make sense to everyone? So if you have like a planar slope, well, no, if you have like an inside out gully, like kind of a high point outside of the contours of the slope, I would kind of describe that as a rib. And those can be really nice to ski, not only because they're really fun, but because you have like options for moving away from from your slough. And this is kind of like the same principle. Like here, you're really like you're at a high, you're on top, you're like it's like you're on top of the ridge. So as long as you're not like, you know, traveling at different like elevations than your partner, which would be kind of weird, then nobody's really at risk as long as you're there. Does that make sense? And you can kind of skin just outside of, like, you're actually really not exposed at all to avalanche danger at all, unless, depending what this looks like here, you know, it looks to me like there's quite a depression. Yeah. But.
Cool. So I know we could talk about terrain selection forever and look at all the examples because I find that super helpful. However, we are nearing our ending time. So is there, Madi and Clancy, do you have, either of you have any last minute things you want to say. And also like we'll have some photo examples and like a PDF of the information we've talked about, as well as the recording in Backcountry Beta. So we'll have all this there. And then if you have more questions, if anyone has questions, you can definitely put them in Backcountry Beta or put them in the chat now. If you have any lingering questions. And then, yeah, Maddie and Clancy, if you have any kind of things you want to do to tie up what we've been talking about.
I think too, just one more thing to add is, you know, in your terrain selection, if it is a complex hill, think about, are you skiing the whole path and then watching from the bottom with your partners, or is there some spot that would be safe to watch your partner from? So whether that's, you know, if you are skiing in a gully, like, could you get up onto a side and kind of like wait for them on top of something where like there is an overhead hazard? And just thinking about like we put a lot of thought into the way up and actually skiing down, but not necessarily like how we're going to go about watching each other sometimes. So
And maybe we can put some details of that in that PDF too. We can do a couple bullet points since we didn't really get into that.
Yeah. Yeah, to that point, just any way that you can look at a mountain and break it down into bite-sized chunks for yourself. Look at individual features, look at where inclination changes, like right here it's 30 degrees, but then it benches out. And yeah, just I think developing an eye for it is just a matter of practice, and practice doesn't always have to be when you're out touring, you know, it can be even when you're watching a ski movie. Just pause it for a sec.
And then, oh, we had a question in the chat and it looks like someone had answered that, but about digging a pit, and that it's to look at the snowpack and assess the stability of it. And yes, we will link stuff. Cool. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for coming. This is a really awesome turnout, and also a really cool thing that we've been doing with True for the past few years. And it's really great that we can provide it for free. There's also, I just want to put it out there, when you register for Backcountry Beta, there is an option to for a registration donation, and all of those proceeds go to the Indigenous Backcountry Scholarship. But Backcountry Beta is free, but I just wanted to let folks know that that is there. And yeah, thank you so much. And thank you, Clancy and Maddie. This was really great. Truly could talk about just looking at terrain choices forever. And I'll probably still never be like, yeah, that's great. Cool. And yes, Jessica, this is rewatchable. It's being recorded. We will get it into Backcountry Beta in the clubhouse, hopefully by Friday, if not Monday at the latest. And then we'll also have a PDF of kind of the things we went over, and then a couple photos as well. And then last chance to just put your first and last name in the chat if you didn't do that, to be entered into the Coalition Snow and True Gear gift card. 2 people will win that. And then next Backcountry Beta is going to be the second Wednesday of February. Don't know what day that is, but yeah, thanks everyone for coming. And any last things, you can put it in the chat. But thank you, everyone. Thank you. Bye.